is actually well-being then for software professionals? So why are we going to talk about that? Richard, can you take the word and talk a little bit about your experience and why this is a big topic we should all take care of?
Yeah, so I think interestingly for me, I've always been physically active. So well-being used to mean to me just physical health, right? And so I've always thought, yeah, I've got that down. I've always gone to the gym. I've played football. I've played squash. I've done running. So that's always been something that's there. And actually, only later in my career did I realize how much that was helping me along the way. But I wasn't doing it deliberately. I wasn't doing it for that purpose. And I hadn't connected the dots. Reflecting more on my career and some of my challenges and trying to piece it all together, and thinking a bit more about the mindset, about mental health and all of that kind of stuff, I realized well-being is much broader than just your physical health. And I think one of the biggest and most interesting things about well-being is that it's very individualistic. And so that is, it's good and it's bad in a sense, because the fact that it's so individualistic means that we can't just put a single label on it. So we can't say to everyone, this is well-being and you've got it or you don't. And so for some people that's hard and it's complicated. On the flip side, it's actually really good for us because well-being means different things to different people, and we decide what being means to us. And that's super important, and it touches, it's very closely linked to a big part of what we're talking about here, which is responsibility. And almost the first part of our responsibility is to define and to recognize what being means to us. And so just broad stroke, that's your physical health, your mental health, feeling safe in the environment that you find yourself in, and feeling safe being social with people as well. And yeah, that's a broad thing, and those different things mean different things to different people, and it's finding your mix of those and then branching out to the things that contribute positively to them, which can also be completely different for different people. So suddenly everything's thrown legs, and it's huge.
And there we are.
Hello.
Hello, everyone. And welcome to another session, a Wednesday session about PWAs or progressive web apps, if it helps you more understanding what the topic is.
It does.
And it does. So I want to talk today about why PWAs are an interesting pick. For 2024 to start with, and what the experience is from basically of our side of we're already in production actually. So we are using those things in production. Actually, I am with my company using those things in production successfully as a substitution for native apps and for other apps as well. So basically, it's a let's say a default stack, I would even say, and it's working quite fluently. And again, we like to talk today to the audience, include the audience, and we hope we get a lot of feedback from you regarding that topic. And yeah, everything will revolve around the audience again. So probably we should start with what we should do is an introduction session again, because we haven't done that for quite a while. So we're assuming that people know us. Probably most of you in the stream know. But Dennis, just introduce yourself a little bit for the new followers, especially from Twitch and from YouTube. Who are you? What are you doing? And what are you doing here?
I'm a technical coach and a life coach, so I help people connect their soft skills with their technical expertise. I coach individuals, leaders mostly, and teams, entire teams, usually in a combination of their leader plus their direct reports to get them to the next level. But really, it's not about it's not a competition. It's not about getting them to the next level per se. It's about making their work environment suck less, so they can either produce things more on time or without getting each other's nerves, or without really making a mess either culturally or financially or any kind of material or interpersonal side effects. Those we sort of try to de-risk. So that's my current situation. I have an engineering background and a life coaching background, so that's sort of what I bring to the table over my, let's say, 16 years in the industry. What about you?
I wanted to quickly add, sounds like you are a father as well.
I am. Father of twins. Yeah. A few little demons.
Yeah, I have.
Or every now and then, and that's okay.
Yeah, I share. What we have in common is that we both are software engineers, father, and somehow I'm a coach as well, mentor, but primarily I'm still working in my own company as CTO. We're working on projects. That's the reason why I have quite a lot to say about things. What I'm talking about on my blog, on the stream here, on LinkedIn is always about my personal experience, my learnings, what went wrong, what went good. So they're both actually. So every time I make a wrong decision, I pay for it actually, literally, which
That's
is
good.
yeah, it's good.
You should
Sometimes
stick around
it's
long
good.
enough to see the consequences of your decisions. Like that's what really makes a great engineer, is that you can see your decisions go to fruition, even if it takes years to figure out, hey, that was a bad one.
Yeah, years literally. So I'm still working down technical debt and mistakes I made in the past. So I made quite a lot of them. The difference 10 years ago to today is for me primarily that today everyone is talking with each other on a global scale. And back then it was, when I compare it, it was basically isolation. So you had maybe some colleagues, and sometimes there were some conferences, and people on the conferences had a totally different context than you had.
Yeah.
And it was very hard mentoring was not really a thing. And it was hard to get to the knowledge, actually.
Yeah,
to
I mean, you
understand.
had books, and that was it. Like
Books,
in
right.
the 2010s, 2000s. Most of the books.
Yeah, quite a lot of books, but this is the same with the conferences. When you read books, you need to translate what you read in a book into your context. Back then, it wasn't that standardized, so it was very different in every company what happened. And since I am basically still in the same context, even if it's not directly my company anymore, but we're still working with those contexts still. Contexts still is like we know how hard it is to actually migrate bad decisions into something good, and this is why I write so often basically that you should think upfront what you want to do. This is what I really appreciate and really recommend to do. And not just try that little thing like I think it was 2 days ago or yesterday, I don't know, where you catched up with a to-do comments topic. I posted that as well beforehand, and it was about get your things done as early as possible. This was basically what I'm thinking is right, because the later you wait and the more you postpone into the future, the harder it gets to actually make it right in the long term. And this is what I really can, upfront today as the big learning is like, don't push anything into the future. This is based on resistance. This is based on wrong motives. Like we don't have time. We have a deadline. We have this lack of resources. In reality, you play the game for long term. It is like for years you play the game, and in long term you always lose when you do that. You don't need to think about that. You will lose on some point, and this is my biggest learning. Unfortunately, a little late in my life, so I already
never too late,
I have some form of backlog still to work down. Right? Okay.
Should we announce the circle?
Yes, we should announce it, and we should send after the show I
Yeah.
would say send the first invitations out. And do you want to do that, or shall I do?
Announce it.
Yeah.
I mean, for those of you who have been listening and keeping good track about our episodes, we did have some difficulty sort of gathering you together all in one place because we're now streaming on 4 different platforms. We have a few different video streaming platforms, a few different social networks involved. So we have, over the weekend, set up a cozy little space on Circle. It's basically Discord for grown-ups with a little bit of Notion baked in, where we can chat. We have our events there, so that once Adrian drops the link, if we do that afterwards, if you're interested, that is going to be from now on the central place where you can go to sort of expect with 100% certainty that we won't miss any comments, that we won't miss any feedback. And it's also where you can hang out off stream. That's kind of the point. There wasn't really any central area to hang out post stream. Some people were commenting in old posts, some people were commenting in our Substack, some people were commenting on various different ways to sort of try to reconnect, but our community is pretty much spread out across all the platforms. So the Circle is where, let's say, it's our little cozy little Reddit.
Our community is not even aware of that there's a community, and we should change something about
That's
that.
our target. We're setting this up for you so that you can have a little our tech journey place that you can call home for anything RTech OTJ related, and we'll improve as we go. There's a few channels right now, and the latest streams are up there. And in the future, we'll have some little bit of extra perks for those of you who are paid subscribers on our Substacks. And Discord for adults. There will be some perks for those of you who are paid sponsors on our, because a few of you, not a lot, but a few of you have sponsored either one of us through our paid Substacks. So there will be some perks for that, to recognize and to appreciate your contribution. What else?
I would point out that I would like to point out that the OTJ community, so our Tech Journey community, shall be a little bit more around the entire topic of our Tech Journey, which is talking about different topics around software engineering in general. That can be everything. So we are both part of that, of course. But the community aspects is about you. So as we always try to involve you, and we have so many tickets, and we have, let's say, at least 50 times 2 streams a year with at least 4 hours a week of streaming, so much content in between, and we need to have something to get everyone together and share, all the knowledge and stuff around that. So you basically can interact with each other. So not only through the comments here, while we're showing comments here in the live stream, but during the live streams and between the live streams, that you have a chance to communicate with each other as well. So on the Circle platform will be a chat for every session, and you can join there and chat with the others about if we're talking nonsense or something like that. So you can blame us, all this stuff what the audience is willing to do, you can do there inside. That's great. And you should join it and just gather some, gather some other informations from other people around those topics and create little communities to work together with us to make this a great topic. You can get to the link. It is I just display it once more. I don't have a clue how to do that. I've never tried it myself, how to get there, so I'm admin there. It's freshly made. It's 1 week old. There is not much in there yet, but it will grow every day now. So the sooner you get inside, the easier it will get for us with your feedback to make this thing great.
Yeah.
Good. Yeah, like Discord for adults, right?
It's Discord for adults. It's absolutely Discord.
I never used Discord, to be honest. I came from TeamSpeak 3, and then I basically did nothing.
Oh, I'm a Mumble generation. I'm a TeamSpeak, Ventrilo, Mumble generation.
Ventrilo, Roger Wilco, for the millennials out there. Roger Wilco, Ventrilo. Yeah, TeamSpeak 1, 2, 3. Yeah, good times. Good. now we have another topic today, right? Than talking about this. PWAs, Progressive Web Apps, posted 2 articles already regarding that and a video. And you find that all on my blog. And the topics on that will be topic for today. That's actually the base. So feel free to ask any questions or comments, or just say if you are thinking we are wrong or have something other to say about that. Progressive web apps are a way to create cross-platform applications in the browser, which is weird in some moment because it just seems to be not cross-platform because it's in the browser. And the point is, we need to reshape, first of all, the terminology browser. We're talking about WebView, which is the core element of the browser, which actually renders the actual engine, this one, not the browser itself, not the buttons. So you can basically have a web view inside something like Electron, inside the app stores, inside your browser, inside anywhere. So as long as you have, for example, the web view of Chromium with the engine behind, you can then basically run a website. And inside this website, you can run a PWA. Because inside the web view, things like the service worker, things like the DOM, is everything available inside there. So those are the prerequisites. And you can move this part around on platforms, which makes PWA a cross-platform solution. And why is this interesting? So first of all, it is and this is now my experience. So this is why I like to have some feedback as well on that. My experience is that the web is extremely easy accessible for the users, for the clients of our company, and for our developers, because web is quite easy to learn, in quotes. So it's actually not in quotes. It is of course a moderate thing to learn over time, but it's in general like it is a very well documented ecosystem. It is old. It is one of the oldest out there, which people know, older than most developers are, and
Hey.
yeah, it is actually like that. So maybe okay, younger developers, so not you. And the interesting part is just that we have something which is, let's say, you can easily create apps, websites in one go. So, and this is another aspect. So you have websites and apps in one, which is actually a web app. So the good part of web apps. Yeah.
Let's start at the beginning. Actually, because I've talked to some of my tech colleagues who have a lot of experience, and they don't really understand what PWAs are. Even I had to sort of look it up. So when we talk about PWAs used to mean something else a long time ago, like 10 years ago. PWAs used to mean something slightly different.
You mean 2016 when the term was coined?
No, even before that. So
then it was no progressive web app.
So it wasn't progressive. It was a web app, but it was an offline web app. So we had offline apps for PWAs. And the way that I found modern PWAs to most easily explain is it's basically an app on your phone that looks like Electron without Electron. So on the iPhone, for example, a PWA is a bookmark to a web page that you've installed on your phone offline. Right? So it is a bookmark to an offline version of the website you visited. If you go to open.spotify.com, that is the web version of the PWA, and you can install it. There's a little icon. If you go to open.spotify.com right now, there's a little, if you're in Chrome, there's a little icon on the top right, which is a desktop button and with an arrow down. That's the install PWA. And that's when you actually pull the PWA and you create a shortcut as if it were a desktop app. And you can do the same thing on the iPhone, where you can just go to the website and say, click the middle button and scroll up, and click the middle button and scroll down and click at the home screen, or at the, I think it's at the home screen. And it'll just create an icon. And in the case of Spotify, it gives near native fidelity, near native performance, and near native functionality.
Yeah.
With some caveats. the application can have a slightly different way of accessing your private data. It can securely store certain things that the web app can't. There are some minor API differences between WebKit and what you would consider modern
WebKit, or what you consider modern. That's good.
No, but it's the SDKs for the native apps they constantly have this flux of what's considered mainstream and backward compatible and what's bleeding edge on the latest iPhone. So there usually is a little bit of contention there. So PWAs, the latest, most modern terminology for PWAs is a website that you can click install for, and it gets its own icon, and it basically just bookmarks your browser. And then when it does so, it doesn't have the location bar anymore. It doesn't have your bookmarks. It just goes into full native full screen.
It can. So you define it by the manifest if you want to have standalone or full screen. Right?
Yes.
No.
My point is, a normal website cannot do that. And even a PWA that you open in the browser cannot do that. You have to install it.
You can bookmark. Sorry, I need to be specific now, a little bit picky. Mm-hmm. You can bookmark pages, but the installation process is something you don't do manually. People think that you install a website, for example, on Chrome. It is basically the same website if you run it in the browser, the same location, than if you would open it from your desktop, for example. It's the same application. In reality, it installs itself with the first call, which is done by the service worker, which is basically a little proxy between you and the website, the web server, which is on your browser, so part of the browser, but not of the DOM. It's basically next to it. And this one then installs or fetches data and basically serves that to your client, even if your client isn't online. This makes the offline first, or the offline capability. And the offline capability is basically part of the definition of a PWA. So if you don't have that, if you don't have a service worker, if we are precise about that, we don't have a PWA, but we can still have a web app. And the point is, web apps before were, basically they could be just online. It is like we know that from so many apps who basically are web apps, but they are actually, let's say, not working offline. And then the next point is, what is actually offline working? Offline, so if you have something you need to upload, you can't do that offline, right? So offline means that your app is still running, like we know that from desktop applications, for mobile applications, that you still can do something. For example, I take a photo, and this photo does have some form of synchronization icon. As long as I am not online, this will stay like that. And as soon as I get online, it is uploaded. So the entire offline functionality is served locally on your browser, in the web app, basically in the progressive web app, and then synchronized when you get it online. And this is actually one of the challenges you actually do that, because you need to rethink how you build something, because you don't build a website in the traditional sense anymore. So something which is just serves like we knew it from PHP era, where you just build something, it's served to the browser. Of course, you could cache it. And I do it, for example, with some applications, but in reality, that is more like, especially when it comes to websites, it would hindering you just with the update process. So the service worker process with the offline capability is only interesting when you really have the requirement for a real offline app. So you need to determine first. So the PWA is basically not a pattern for everything. It is a pattern for this thing, like things you do with Flutter, things you do with React Native. You can do it with PWA as well, the technology set. So I think that was quite a good introduction. And we have another thing, or I can say, before the term was coined in 2016, the first person who was very prominent, was talking about the idea of having exactly that, was actually Steve Jobs. The person who everyone is thinking...
But that was in 2007, right? So there's a 10-year difference between Steve Jobs' speech and PWA being...
the vision was that what we know as PWAs today, should be what apps are on Apple phones, on the smartphones back then. So that
one of
was
the
the vision. No?
One of the first applications that had that, so a website that had a manifest file to make itself partially available offline, so you could offload caches to the browser and some limited functionality, like some simple JavaScript or maybe a bunch of files that it didn't have to retrieve, but it also wasn't permanently cached without full control. Was Gmail, actually. Gmail, in the era where they were starting to experiment with Google Wave. If you remember, there was a time when Google Drive and Google Docs did not allow two cursors, two people simultaneously editing text. That came with Google Wave. Google Wave failed, but that technology then got inserted into Google Drive, Google Docs, and then that sort of always alive and WebSocket communication that came into Gmail. And when that hit the sort of stable version of Gmail, we got offline mode for your inbox essentially. So before we had, because I think Gmail took forever to be sort of equivalent in functionality on the iPhone at the very beginning, because Apple was very specific that they wanted to really limit how much Google can access its ecosystem. They wanted to have a monopoly for the first few years. But the native app did actually function offline. The point was that you could open the app even if you're offline, so that at the very least you can read the old emails that you've already downloaded and maybe write a reply. Then you only need online connectivity to actually send something out into the ether, right? So the difference is that rather than using your browser as a viewport to sort of just for this once temporarily render something from from a remote server, a PWA or an offline app basically talks to the server, and some part of it gets installed on your local device. Yeah. So that the next time you open up the page, it starts from your local device first, and then there's different strategies of hydration and sort of, am I a cache and then I get replaced, or am I only gonna spin up if I'm not on the internet, and then I sort of have a drop-in replacement for offline mode. There are different strategies. Meta, for example, just shows you a very high fidelity login page. Gmail might actually give you partial functionality. Then you have various, Spotify, for example, might give you access to just look at the last song you played and maybe even have it still in the buffer, but you can't really browse anything.
Yeah, there are actually that you can spin this very deep. So, for example, most applications rewrite are very, let's say, simple, which means it is more like that you have the this let's say offline and reliable feel that the app is still there, just gives you skeletons, and you can even reload it while offline and you still have skeletons. But if you dig deeper, and this is what we've done as well, is that you actually have a full working client app actually. So the app itself is working entirely offline, and it is only synchronizing with the API as soon as it gets online, like we know it from desktop applications back then. So it means the entire logic is not on the backend, it's on the client. Of course, there are some guards, there's some security stuff on the backend to validate those things, but like we know it from game stuff and validating things to not manipulate it on some way, but you can do that like this as well. And this is then something which is entirely interesting to do that with web technologies, in my opinion, because basically no one is really thinking about, so from the people I know, to dig that deep with web technologies, but it's actually well possible cross-platform since years already. So you can do that with Safari, even if everyone is blaming Safari and WebKit for not, keeping up with all the modern specifications that fast. In reality, it is good possible to do apps like this. And I want to share something right now. This is something of the last post I made. It is actually to give you a little bit the idea of where PWAs are when you would put it into a sector matrix. And the point is, this is what we just said beforehand, it works offline, it's installable, it's feature rich. This is what we come in the later part of the show as well. It is basically App Store ready, which means you can basically put this web view, as we said in the beginning, into the app stores as well. So both Apple and basically all web stores out there are actually working with that. It's fast already, so it wasn't in the very beginning, but with, let's say, modern approaches, you get this to be fast as well. Even with older phones, it's possible, like a native app. And this is the good part, you can share it like a website. You have it cross-platform and cost-effective. And what is not here explicitly written, it is discoverable, which means that it is, once you have downloaded it, of course, you can tell search engines to ignore it with robots.txt, for example. But if you don't do that, you can basically use the advantages of an SEO optimized website as well for your app. So this is something native apps cannot do at the moment. Even things like Flutter does have problems doing optimized things in the web yet. And you can do that with web itself, because web is web, it's optimized for itself.
So the idea is that if your native app is a way to get a web service onto somebody's phone, it's very likely that a PWA will be a much more natural transition point if you already have a browser-based experience of some kind, right? So, and you might not even know it. You might be using a lot of PWAs, Gmail, Instagram, Telegram, WhatsApp, no. WhatsApp isn't, but all of the big, Airbnb, Uber, Volt, DoorDash, Spotify, these are all PWAs, and you've been using them and you don't even know it.
It is a matter of digging deep, and you need to unlearn. So sorry for the people I might engage now, but you need to unlearn the ways how you build websites. If you want to build PWAs, they work a little differently. So you need to put way more time into thinking in building like UIs instead of putting too much time in fulfilling like the ideas of how yours should have a semantic page and accessibility and all this kind of stuff. It applies as well, but you have this different level, which is way more important to actually get it to the native app feel like. So it's not really about that people will be pissed off if it doesn't feel like an app. The point is there is no default standard for what is an app. So frameworks like Ionic Framework were trying to do that. Meme what iOS is doing, meme what Android is doing, and have those UI things. But the point is, what people mean like app-like is this performance. So you click on something, you get feedback, it is fast, responsive, basically doing things. And here's the point what I mean. So if you have a slow API and you wait for the API before you open, for example, a new page, a new modal, then you have, let's say, a bad user experience. You would have the same if you would work in the native sector as well. So if you would wait for something and then open it. So this is not really a performance issue. This is made wrong. This is simply the problem. So you basically need to think in offline terms. So it is important, for example, to have a lot more background synchronization. So you have actually background sync API available as well to, even when the app is closed and all this kind of stuff, get some new data, keep it current so that you can load the data while you are offline. And offline loading is always the fastest. There's nothing as fast as loading out of local memory. And this is then what we call offline experience. This is what makes PWAs fast. Maybe not exactly as fast as real native apps. So because sometimes you have just not the flagship phones. Sometimes you have mediocre phones for, let's say, $100 or something like that. Of course, they will have more struggle to run the WebView actually in a fast thing, other than you would write it directly in a native language, which is then translated closer to the hardware. But the point is, and this is an argument which is quite old as well already. It is, let's say, a mediocre phone today is way better than it was, let's say, a mediocre phone was 10 years ago. And the notion of that is still a decade old, where we say, oh, we have those bad internet connections, bad phones, and kind of thing. So this is what we saw when we basically were looking in, I'm talking about European standards right now. So not American standards, not Far East or East standards. It is basically the European standards. And we don't have any performance problems with PWAs so far. So that was never an issue. Okay, so just to wrap up the graphic, what we see here, we have the sectors, and you see that the PWA is not as performant as, so it's basically not as high in the performance axis than native apps are, and that's still true. You will never get this when you have basically, if you would build the same application on both, native would be faster. It's simply the facts. But it is not like PWA is slow. It is like if you would measure it, the native apps are faster. If you would build both correctly.
And we have to mention that sometimes the performance itself is not important compared to the payload size. PWAs are ridiculously small scale. You know, if your native app is an embedded PWA, but it comes with Electron, then you essentially have the entire ecosystem of a browser backend shipped with your app. And then that makes it humongous, you know, to have React Native in there, to have Electron in there, and then you created a website, and it is a PWA, but it's not being distributed as a PWA. It is then being compiled now into a binary, so you can put it into the App Store, and then the deliverable will essentially, the binary will be essentially humongous.
There's no benefit. Exactly, and there is you need to update it. So if you need to run something like continuous delivery, good luck, because you need to actually make it every time through the progress and process of auditing by the app stores and reviewing and say, okay, you can deploy. And
it can still be continuous, but there is a latency involved with external governance. You know, like the
and you don't have that with the PWA actually. And this is quite interesting. So of course this is quite concerning at the same time, because especially app stores don't really like that. This is one of those issues with PWAs in app stores, is that you basically I forgot the term. Marcel was posting it in a comment. It was right, actually. This is one of those problems. You can on day one deploy something into the app store, and on day two it's basically another website. And this is one of those problems, of course. But on the other hand, if you would skip app stores, which we do, so we don't have any app on the app store because no one is demanding it in reality, because people just, it's just an older expectation to have something on the app store.
What you cannot do with PWAs is you cannot charge somebody to install it, right? So it has to be a web-based technology that you distribute through visiting your website. So it is not offline in that sense. For example, what is it? Fruit Jam, one of the oldest games on the iPhone, doesn't have a PWA. It doesn't have a web form where you go to fruitjam.com and it gives you the equivalent game. It is only operational as the native app, and it has to make contact with your device through a distribution center like the App Store. So PWAs are called PWAs not because you need to be online or because it's using web technologies, but because the mode of distribution is the web. It has to come from a domain name that has a manifest. We have a few questions already. You want to go through them?
Yes, go. Would you mind, would you handle them and I would answer them?
So we missed a few. Alex mentioned, you already had it on screen, I just didn't read it out loud for our listeners, because we have a lot of listeners as well. Love these comments. For some reason, we touched on the same topics I recently posted about here on LinkedIn. Alex, thank you so much for being with us. Grant mentioned, I had to write the company coding standards 3 times before the web. It's a terrible awful naming conventions. Yeah, I feel a pain. Lots of unwritten rules. Let's see. And then Sabalay had a comment. This is good for adults. Thank you. And Mateusz says, I think, Dennis, you're talking about progressive enhancement. With that, we could push to offline mode and other features. Probably it was confusing that new term PWA was similar. Look for some time that PWA evolved from progressive enhancement. PWA is more like graceful degradation path because it already requires you to think about offline mode and other stuff. So I didn't mean progressive enhancement. That's a Web 2.0 term that originated sometime in the early 2004s, 2005s.
But I think it's related to that. They
When
just
the
picked it
CSS
up.
standards, yes, but the timeline is different. So PWAs got termed and officially supported in browsers in 2016 by Chrome, and specifically Google's Chrome. So not WebKit, not Chromium, but Google Chrome. But the manifest project, so the key ingredients to PWAs are a Mozilla Corporation inspired idea, and that started in 2013. So that was essentially this idea that if I visit your website, and back in those years, you'd constantly visit the website, and there was this like huge market for middleware to figure out: are you a phone? Are you a tablet? Are you a desktop with this kind of screen? Are you landscape? Are you portrait? And there was a huge market to figure out what it was, and it was very difficult to catch this information from request to request. So one of the earliest stages for a PWA was that you could go online, and then once you, on the tablet, for example, you hit the web server. The web server identifies that you're a tablet, and then it would give you the application manifest. And then with that application manifest, you would then store the CSS optimized to your device and the JavaScript optimized to your device. And maybe you would have a little script with a web worker that says, on the next request, tell the server immediately that I'm a tablet in a format that the website understands. In code, with code that was written by the backend team. So that was a concept that started about 10 years ago, in 2013, 2014. At least we started aggressively using it for static landing pages for e-commerce site. Because I remember that very well. That was also just after I attended a Google I/O a few years earlier, because they did hit on this initially. But it's not to be confused with progressive enhancement, but it is the manifest project. So, but progressive enhancement is from 2004, 2005. The manifest project is from 2013. PWA officially started in 2016, and they haven't been popularized until about 2020, 2021, where all the major dominant apps started building their own PWAs. So open.spotify.com is probably the most used one, Gmail, and then the social networks plus the sort of service applications and dating applications. They usually have PWAs. Tinder, I think Bumble as well. Then you have all the food services. Anything basically that is e-commerce in an app, or utility or office tools in an app, Slack, Teams. They're all PWAs. They can be PWAs. They do come in PWA form.
Okay.
That's that. Raul. Hey, Raul. Good to see you. What is missing somehow is a PWA market or some similar solution where end users could install them in a transparent possible way. I know it is easy to install by going to Real with the links we create for each device, but it's not that nice.
Yeah,
I
there are
be
PWA markets, but there are open source private projects. This is nothing you have by a major browser provider, major device provider. And the only way at the moment, or the only thing, is actually the Play Store, and I think a Windows Store as well. Microsoft Store? How is it actually called? The store for Microsoft. But it is, you can basically push PWAs without a wrapper into those platforms, and they will be deployed for you. So this is already possible, but this is not on the App Store of Apple. And if you want to have it in the App Store from Apple, you need to have
users. Like a user would not know that it has to look for a PWA.
Yeah, which is good actually.
I mean,
I don't know. I'm pretty sure that most of the audience don't know about how many apps they are actually using at the moment are already PWAs, which is a good sign. So if you would know it, it was.
Most people install apps by either clicking on install on iPhone on a website, and then usually that installs a PWA.
You don't need to.
Or you just scan a QR code and it just
The,
brings you to
the PWA is not meant to be used in the browser. The PWA is a technology set for the web view. And the web view can be in the browser, but it can be somewhere else as well. For example, in the Spotify app you download from the App Store.
Okay, but now you're splitting hairs with semantics, right? Because a application that has WebKit support and has support for the web technologies and the DOM, usually we call a browser. Even if it's a headless V8 engine, that can also be called a browser. But usually when we say browser, we mean explicitly the Safari on my phone, the Chrome on my phone. But to use a PWA, you do need a browser. But it doesn't have to be your primary browser.
For simplification, we can agree. Okay.
Yeah. But the web view. So the point is, it is not a web view that is being. So it is not a browser-like experience spawned from another native application. Instead, it is the native browser, but separate from the native browser application, right? So when you pull up a PWA on the iPhone, it is Safari, but the Safari session is separate from your normal Safari session, which is a singleton on your app, which is a unique concept of isolation that is not possible from within the app itself. That's sort of the main gimmick here. Of course, it's a little bit different on Android, and I don't have it's been a while since I used an Android app for development purposes, so I won't waffle on too much detail on that.
Okay.
Who is this? Is this Thomas? This doesn't sound like Thomas.
LinkedIn users always Thomas.
LinkedIn users always Thomas. Oh, he did ask me. Thomas, if you're watching, I would recommend that you go on Circle and register. Because we probably should have a discussion about the code examples that you sent me. So Thomas had an architecture and front-end middleware architecture question that I think we should address at some point in a future episode. It is Thomas. No, wait, it's not. Yeah, it is Thomas. No. But his question got truncated, so I'm opening up in LinkedIn. Question, Thomas asks. What is the most critical problem you face with PWA and native apps? I am 40 minutes behind the stream time. Always when I'm using a web page app, I'm facing problems with scrolling, reactions to actions, logging in. Is there a storage possibility of files in the PWA like video files? Oh, you have hands-on experience with this, Adrian?
Yeah. Actually, those are several parts of a question, right? So first of all,
PWA versus native.
No, PWA versus native. There is not really this distinction. So the point is, when you do a native app, and you do it like on a professional level, you put quite a lot of money into that. And oftentimes PWAs, because it's so accessible, it's oftentimes a side project. So first of all, we need to have a context here. If we have a fully fledged 5-person, let's say 2-pizza team, which has enough resources for the next 6 months to build a mediocre requirement app, then you won't have the problems on both sides. You wouldn't have any form of strange login issues or something like that in your app.
Or you need to have an expert for each platform, for each version of the platform, for each variation.
So it's simply much easier for some new developer to start building a web app than it is to build a native web app in both platforms. And this is already the problem. Of course, you can use Flutter, you can use React Native, but it's still more complicated to do that, which is, as soon as it becomes more complicated, you need to be more sophisticated. Thus, it means that you probably have a larger team and more budget to do that. Otherwise, you wouldn't have decided for this way. So this is just a strategic aspect now. And this is my point. So if you're in the correct context, you shouldn't have either of those problems. When it comes, for example, scrolling and reactions to actions, this is what I said in the beginning. It's like when you click on a link and the data is loaded in the moment when you want to click, and when it's basically on your device, you then open up something. This is not a performance issue of your device. This is badly made.
Yeah.
Simply badly made. So you don't use the capabilities.
I always say good performance is a side effect of good architecture. It is intentional. It has nothing to do with the technology you're using.
Yeah.
You can create good performance apps on a old Atari with 600 bytes of memory, or you can create great performing apps on a iPhone that has 32 gigabytes of RAM, or a terrible one.
Yeah, for example, I have around 10 tablets lying around at home, at my office, several smartphones of all generations. Sometimes I test things on those. The point is, when you take an older tablet, for example, and you want to run your application there, and you open your PWA, you press a button, even if it's a good PWA, you press the button and somehow it's not responsive, and suddenly it goes. It's basically a lag. And then you think, PWA is nothing because it's so. Then you open WhatsApp or any other app and you see the same result. So we need to stay in context. A slow device is a slow device no matter what you use there. So, and the most problems we have today, which are mixed with that kind of problem, is a badly made PWA, which doesn't follow any best practices by, getting the data. For example, if you log in already, fetch the data in the background you need in the next steps, and as soon as the user clicks, it loads from the cache from the device, and then you have no problem at all on the device. And this is something you just need to use there. And another part of the question was storing large files. Yes. Today I quickly send a link to you as well. I sent something out today about that. It's actually Snackable CTO blog. I posted here and I posted in LinkedIn as well. It is persisting data in modern web apps. And what we have there is, I quickly share my screen again because I think this is interesting for everyone. I just say it is. So, okay. So we have
It's a great post. It's a great post. Can you go down to the hydration part?
Hydration part?
Yeah, the cookie part is only interesting to you. This one. The IndexedDB and the one
exactly.
Above.
So the IndexedDB, one above. Okay. So we have
These. Yeah.
No, this is exactly caching. So we have several ways of being able to cache things on your device, which is first of all the service worker. The service worker is a form of passive cache. So it means you cannot actively cache things with the passive service worker other than calling something, and the service worker then is caching, for example, a get query. So you can't cache post or something like that. So you can only cache get queries. Get requests. And you have in Workbox, for example, strategies to build a service worker. You can basically build them on your own as well, but it is easier to use something like Workbox, in my opinion, in my experience. For example, strategies like SWR or stay while revalidate. I can't. This doesn't go off my tongue. So it's basically SWR for me, which is basically the balanced approach. Every time you don't know exactly what to do, it's good to start with that one. Then you have things like network first, network only, cache only. You can basically decide for every route you have what kind of network, let's say, caching strategy you want to have. So this is the service worker. And then you have the IndexedDB. The IndexedDB is an asynchronous storage. And for actually large data. So there is some quota limitations I will show you in a bit.
Large in quotes. Large in
up to 80% of your device.
Yeah.
That's actually quite large. And there on iOS, there are some, let's say you need to install it first. Otherwise, it's way lower, or way less. But it's actually possible. So and we're using at the moment to stream to you exactly that technology. Yeah. We're using StreamYard, which is a PWA.
Yeah.
And
local cache, it goes to my system first, and then it streams what it can to have a buffer. So there's no jitter while
you can do that. A short term to just answer the question. Yeah. Yes, you can. Basically, this is one of the apps we have. Is we're taking basically 40 megapixels photos. Let's say this is about surveying real estates. There will be for every contract you have about 20 to 40 images you take locally with your high performance camera, and then it's basically downgraded within a web worker. And then it's uploaded to the server.
Most of your developers on Teams or Slack, when you upload a video, you would normally get a loading bar and the thumbnail before it hits the server. That's because it's being uploaded into, and it's being buffered through your sort of, what is it? It's local file system API?
No, it's
And-
most of the time it's still IndexedDB because local file system API is the early adoption version. It's basically beta.
I
if you
hate
like.
the way they named it. But if you go to, for example, the point is the video goes to your file system first in the context of the app, so that you can already the app can already extract the thumbnail from it and sort of decode a few frames from it before it hits the backend server. If you've used VS Code in the browser, I think it's VS Code.dev or code.dev, and or things like StackBlitz or Replit, they live in your browser as well. And StackBlitz, for example, has all of the Node.js environments in your browser. They actually create a fake file system in your browser using these APIs to store files locally, to compile them, and you basically have a whole Node.js backend ecosystem or sort of front-end ecosystem living in your browser and then partially synchronizing to a web server to then sort of fake an environment where you have an IDE and the browser and the thing that you're developing in, and sort of managing the entire ecosystem in a seamless experience, very similar to your sort of desktop IDE. So there are many different use cases for these things. GitHub, for example, if you go to Edit Live, or if you've ever done GitHub Actions or Markdown editors, those are also sort of PWA, approaching PWA level native functionality. But they have different security reasons why they do or don't want certain features in the offline version. Okay,
and
what
the
else?
file system. So we have the index. Just to wrap this up, we have the IndexedDB, which is basically, I would call it the big standard. If you want to store asynchronously large files, you can use it. It's very durable. It's working. But let's say there's a caveat. So if you delete your app or cache clear or something like that, then actually the data is lost as well. And if you have something like golden data, which is definitely important, so for example, you collect it offline, like we're doing at the moment with the video files, you want to have that definitely on some point later in time online. So it must be, so if our system is crashing now, we can upload the videos tomorrow as well, technically, because they're still there. But if I would cache clear my site, they would be lost, actually. The file system is a little different. The file system is the real file system of the device with an API to the browser, to the web view. And which means that you actually can store files in a special, or let's say isolated area of your file system persistently. This is a persistent file system, which means even if you uninstall your website, you need to remove the files manually. This is great, because that was one of the largest issues we had with people, because they had a broken build on with the PWA, they needed to remove it, and all the data was lost as well. And with file system, this problem is solved. Unfortunately, when WebKit announced it, we implemented this as early adopters. We were so happy about that. And during the development, they just removed the feature again because it was buggy for them.
They also work differently. So the file system API is, so it is durable file-based storage, but it is not a database. It is more like think of it like an object storage, like S3. You have a file name and you have a blob and you just store it.
Yeah, but you can actually make it compatible to each other.
You can make it compatible. You can put SQLite in it, or you can put something equivalent in it. You can install.
Basically, we had
I think, is it DuckDB or the other one?
No. What I mean is you just have. No, it's actually just a wrapper. For example, what you have your file actions like read, write, delete, move, or something like that. And you basically can have a wrapper above that and just say, I want to have this file with this blob or this base 64 representation of it. Please save it. And if, for example, in the progressive meaning of progressive web apps, if file system is available, store it on the file system. If file system is not available, store it in the IndexedDB. And the abstraction is handling that.
My point is, yes, you can use IndexedDB if you don't have access to file system, but IndexedDB is actually a schema-separated versioned NoSQL database, and it has a little bit more power than the file system API, and they are not equivalent in that direction.
And
It's
one
very
point
hard.
with the file systems is it is not displayed here. You need to access it via I forgot how to actually. It is actually a file system in the browser then and not here, which is a little bit awkward to develop. So the first time you need to do that is, let's say they have some way to go to make it a real good developer experience actually. At the moment you only see IndexedDB as a large file storage. So for everyone here who's new to front-end development, don't use local storage and session storage if you can avoid it, especially not for large files. It's only up to 5 megabytes in general, and especially session storage does have dementia. Don't save anything inside that if you want to have it persistent. And don't use WebSQL. WebSQL is actually deprecated. It will be removed on some point in time.
Nobody
if you have
is using WebSQL. WebSQL is like managing a schema on a ephemeral sort of size sensitive front end. Like nobody ever thought that having a client facing SQL database was a good idea. So I'm glad they deprecated that. IndexedDB is a much better solution.
Exactly. So if you have anything to save, use IndexedDB, but don't press that button because then your golden data is lost. Okay, then I think we've done. I think this has solved this question. So what do we have else? We have
That was
something,
Thomas's
right?
question. Then we have Zoran. Zoran asks, "Can we build PWAs in Rust completely, and does it make sense?"
Yeah, you can build it basically
do
in everything which
anything in any
can deliver HTML, JavaScript, and CSS. The point is,
Rust, to give Rust some credit, Rust is the most functional and declarative friendly language, but written in C style, right? So it is natural to it is not Erlang, it is not it is not Haskell, right? But it is a very much sort of declarative and functional leaning language that is more natural to a sort of classically thought C style language. All the C style languages like C, C#, C++, Java, PHP is C inspired, TypeScript, JavaScript, etc., etc., etc. So these languages have a sort of very imperative and very procedural focus, and I think Rust is one of the sort of one of the newest languages that is sort of have a really nice balance. Python being a terrible one where they added object orientation later on, and it's just terrible.
I want to make a very bad joke now. So you can solve the question yourself if you can build a PWA in Rust, because I show you now where my office is. It
Don't
is
dox
here.
yourself.
So
Don't
please, I build PWAs in Rust.
In Rust.
So I think the question is solved, right? Okay.
That's great.
Good. So basically, you can build it in everything which can serve those files. The point is you need to cache it with service workers. This is what you actually need to do to have the capability,
Perhaps,
reliability.
I don't know Zoran's focus here, because with service workers, you're also opening up the question of, are we using WebAssembly? And are we using WebAssembly transliterated or compiled from a language like Rust, right? So there's that added angle of we have service worker middleware or a service worker backend. What will be the language of choice there if it's going to be compiled anyway? My advice would be please do it in TypeScript or JavaScript. Like just use a native language to the browser, because otherwise you'll just create a camp where you still have like I'm sort of very anti-Flutter, because this idea that I'm building something for the web and I don't want to write any amount of JavaScript, I think it's silly. JavaScript is the language of the web. If you have a language, a second-order language that fully abstracts away all the JavaScript that you have to write, I think in 2024 that's a silly undertaking, because all of these languages are extremely powerful. But if you have a good use case, if it makes sense for your business, why not? But you are saying no to the most dominant size of the market currently. It's either JavaScript, TypeScript, and web technologies, or C, Python, C++, a little bit of Go. Right? So that's
I would even
most
ask
part.
the question, and this is maybe an interesting topic as well, is in what do you really build PWAs? For let's say a good cost efficiency and all those kind of things. There is a lot of discussion going on right now, for example, on LinkedIn, and
Stripe
and,
just recently migrated. They were using JavaScript with Flow. If you remember, Flow was the next iteration of CoffeeScript, and that is
That's
an
old.
extremely archaic
yeah.
dialect of JavaScript that was sort of supported on top of native JavaScript using
I
Babel,
remember
the same way
CoffeeScript.
as TypeScript until we got native support for TypeScript. I'm personally a TypeScript user, but I don't use the JavaScript tools for TypeScript. I'm a huge Vite and Bun fan, right? So Vite and Bun are, I think, Bun is native and Vite is, I think, written in Rust, right? So nowadays we use Rust written compilers for our TypeScript to JavaScript code and JSX and testing, right? So there are these benefits here, but ultimately, you need to really focus on what is important to the user. If at the end of the day it gets compiled to JavaScript, it might help if you know JavaScript, because JavaScript is not assembly language. JavaScript is still what is being interpreted on the user's browser, and it is equivalent to the language you're writing. It is not a lower order language than what you're using to write, right? So if it's just going to be transliterated left to right without any added benefit to you, I would say,
Okay.
adapt to the majority of the market. That would be the best, unless you have a really, really good business reason to write in something.
But always have in mind that you build.
Backend-wise, I have no backend-wise, I have no objection. If your backend is in Rust and you want to put a little bit of middleware with WebAssembly written in Rust, no problem. But if your backend is in TypeScript and your frontend is in TypeScript and you want to, for some reason, you want to write something in Rust and put it in a web service worker with WebAssembly, I think that's a little bit extreme. That's more like a passion project.
Keep it where it belongs. Keep it where it belongs. So you're building an app in the browser. So we agreed on term browser. Then build it in the browser. So don't build it in a backend which serves the browser. You can, if you do that with something like Next.js and using Next PWA, you can use server, let's say SSR, so server-side rendered components to do that. But even then, especially for the use cases with those, deep offline capabilities, I still prefer to have a static export instead of server-side rendering, because the real let's say the real advantages from server-side rendered things is more on the website side, not on the app side. Yeah. And this is especially when when you want to push your application to stores or something like that, it must be an artifact on its own. And this is what I still prefer. This is basically what I'm doing with all my apps. Yeah. So we have Raul.
Raul, okay.
Oh, sorry, Mateusz.
We had Mateusz, but I didn't quite understand his question. I meant of your talks with others and those had problems with understanding what PWAs. So that's related to the previous comment.
I meant
right?
Of your talks with others and those had
problems. I think PWA is not a very well adopted term, even between technologists. I think I think engineers would mostly know this, file this under offline app, more so offline app or offline cache or a manifest or a webEx or a Chrome extension, because it is actually very similar to how Chrome extensions are built, even though the APIs are slightly different, or sort of there are additional Chrome extensions there. But yeah, I don't think until Adrian started talking about PWAs, I didn't actively use this acronym specifically. But I see that this is what's adopted in the PWA community. So if you want to be a PWA technologist, then PWA is the acronym that the PWA community uses. So there's that.
I tried to find the LinkedIn poll about who already used PWA in production. Oh, there it is. Oh, finally. So 70 people voted. 33% said in production. 23 said as a side project or smaller. And over 40% said never. So there is not much other. So basically it is very, people are very distinct about that actually. So at least in my audience on LinkedIn. I would say most don't really know. And what I wanted what to add is, it is like if you really know what PWA is about, in my opinion, you need to go through the challenges yourself and experience that, because it's clunky. It is still not a final good way to work in it. So
it's only really, really good in Chrome. Let's be honest. Like, you have to be using a.
Still, you have the Safari is the IE under the PWA interpreting browsers, you know, and you have this like people in the support. We use Sentry, for example, and then we need to take a look. And then Apple had a lot of problems with quotas and all this kind of stuff.
Look, there's a reason why Electron uses Chromium for its base browser, right? So it's
For example, just a simple example, you need to store. Oftentimes, you need to store large amount of data, you know. And in Safari, it was like if you did that too many times in a row, so you basically had too many API calls to the IndexedDB to store stuff, you basically broke it. That was like suddenly you got this quota error message, which wasn't real. It wasn't like that, and that's actually quite, let's say, that's annoying, because you need to find. I wrote about this actually in the articles. You need to find workarounds to solve that. We solved that actually, but you need to really, you know, make tests, and this feels like a little bit like a pushback. So those are the downsides. And another thing is that, for example, we had several service calls, and there was the message again, quota exceeded. So there was no space for the app to save anymore. But they said, hey, I have 80% left on my device, on my new smartphone. It's so great, my new Apple phone. What's wrong? So your app is not working. And what was the case was actually they said that you can basically save the apps in the cloud on Apple since some versions, you know. And they basically clicked on that, and all was fine. The PWA still was working, but the cloud was full, and they weren't willing to pay for it. So the app said, even if there was space on the device, said, no, there's no space anymore. And then you need to find out, of course, you probably have this problem with a native app development
your
as well.
iTunes cloud storage or your sort of Apple ID cloud storage, and then that one was much more limited than the phone.
Those are one of those things, you know, this is what I mean by you don't develop websites anymore. You start to have those problems, right?
It is over abstracted. You know, the SDK, the native API inside the browser, doesn't have a distinction for I am running on iPhone, and on the iPhone this might happen, right? You need to sort of work around that.
We have a lot of if-else things. There is quite a lot, like, and it's actually not that easy to find out. It is like you have this standalone thing.
It is bleeding edge. Like it is a technology that was standardized in 2016. It's seeing adoption a few years ago. So we are now in the same era as, you know, Redux and Angular and NGRX Store had in the sort of mid 2010s, 2014, 2013.
Raoul said, Flash is the player for the web, and Java applet is the standard for dynamic web. Sarcasm. That's true.
HTMX is the new Flex.
WebAssemblies are missing in his statement. But actually, there is a cool application out there which is called Printess. It's a web-to-print client, actually. So you can create, like an InDesign server. It's basically a very, 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 very fast web application. And the reason is it's built in WebAssembly in C++. And
so it's a print driver?
Yeah. What do you say?
It's a print driver?
It
uses itself as a print driver. You can print into it or from it.
No. It's no. That's not. Sorry. It is basically a software like Canva.
Okay.
It's a software like Canva, and it's extremely fast. you see that it's not behaving like a website because it's actually a C++ application. But it is extremely fast in rendering and all this kind of stuff because that type actually Canva solved it somehow in the browser. But anyway, so it is an interesting thing just for the comment that you can have those things as well, but they wouldn't fit into the idea of PWA actually because you can't store it in the service worker. That's actually it. Okay, so we have no more comments today. Feel free to toss more comments. So maybe we should go into I think please let us know what you want to hear about. Do you want to have us explaining PWAs more, talking a little bit about experience, what was going good, what was going bad, more like comparisons between native? What is interesting for you guys? Tell us. And I would. So is there something?
There is. Sabale mentions.
Okay.
Saba mentions. I think PWAs are the best of both worlds, web and native, but I've never developed one because the fear it'll break as native. So, what is your advice to avoid the big bang?
The good thing on progressive web apps is it is progressive, which means that you start on some point to develop your application, and if you just follow good software engineering standards, it is basically just a software product and you can continuously enhance it. And now we come to this is actually a good point. We come to the strategic and tactical level now. The cost. So most of the LinkedIn people I know are in the small to maximum of medium-sized area. They are not in the enterprise level, and you have limitations. And this was in the video I posted some days ago. You have limitations. So some people or some teams I mentor are actually just five people. They're like just 5 engineers, mixed teams. And they have an Android, they have the Apple version, and they have the web version, and they have the web dashboard version, and the backend stuff as well. All in the same team. So we have so many sub-teams that you actually cannot speak of team anymore. And there is the problem. So they are totally overwhelmed with what they do. And they have so many problems because they have so many code bases. And they struggle with ideas how can we get this with a monorepository streamline and all this kind of stuff, instead of just getting completely away from that type of architecture with so many code bases and just have one. Of course, there are things like Flutter, React Native, you can use that as well. This is another topic for today, but today we're talking about PWAs. And then we come to the requirements, and this is related to that question as well. Most companies I've worked with in the last 20 years, from the past until today, don't have requirements that make PWA impossible to meet them. And this is simply a fact. So even if you have video rendering, video composing, image sampling, image composing, those high-level things of performance issues, where everyone says, yeah, you have performance issues. Yeah, but we have web workers, so just use them. Then you have another CPU thread. It's done, no problem anymore. You can just use it, you just need to understand it. So PWA in modern web technologies, even Safari can do this, is able to fulfill the requirements, which means that you only need PWAs if you are actually willing to. So this is the strategic level. You save money, and when I get back to this team of 5 people, 5 engineers just working on one code base, one front end, one back end, and the front end is actually a PWA client, then you don't have those problems anymore. You can focus on getting with good engineering principles, continuous delivery, trunk-based development, TDD, respecting coupling and cohesion, all this kind of stuff, and just get one application right. One application, get it right, and just deploy it cross-platform, and then optimize it. If you see some UX problems, if you see some user misery in Sentry, for example, you can measure user misery, then just, fix it. Concentrate on one code base. But if you have already 3 code bases, you are done. You won't fix it with 5 people. It's simply not possible. You don't have the time, you don't have the budget, you will be overtime, you will be in constant stress. You can't optimize. You just survive. And this is the thing why I prefer something like PWA, so you can have other solutions as well. But, and this is another point,
I think
The
React
admin
Native is the
yeah,
is
but
closest solution to
the point is the admin dashboard and the website, for example. You can have everything in one client. Actually, you know that sometimes people have this website and then app.website.com, for example, the subdomains. You actually in a PWA can have this in one. Even with good tree shaking and those kind of things, it's even possible to get 100% performance. So I just measured mine today. One of the PWAs of us, and I thought it would be terrible regarding performance because I saw a post today about the vanilla version, and the one I'm talking about is with built with Next PWA, so Next.js and PWA plugin, and it's actually 100% on mobile performance on first, which was actually quite interesting to see. So you don't have those problems either, which was very, very pleasing to me, I have to say. Taking some breath. So I hope that answered the question. Yeah, it does. Okay.
Mateusz and others are requesting for more examples about data synchronization, offline mode. Camilla mentions common pitfalls in the implementation with examples. And Grant mentions I had an issue with clearing cache. So there seems to be this sort of hydration problem, or sort of first wake up, sort of synchronizing from offline mode.
Let's go one after the other. First of all, thank you. That's actually great that we have now some toppings and we know about what you like and what not. So maybe about problems with offline mode. We had that in the other comments as well. So, and as I mentioned before, offline mode means that you need to create your app that is exported with a first call, which means you download roughly around 20 megabytes in a mediocre PWA. This is the size of stuff you download, but not before you actually been able to use it. And the point is, modern frameworks are actually exporting the stuff in a specific order. So if you have, for example, an index file, you can already have a first colorful paint very fast, like you would have it with a website as well. As I said, 100% performance is possible. And the other stuff is just downloaded when you need it. So it's basically just prepared. And as soon as this download process is done, the service worker is marked as installed. As soon as you upload a new version, the service worker recognizes, oh, the hashes have changed. This is not my version anymore. I offer a upload. And then you have several options. You can do like skip waiting and this kind of stuff. You can show this, there's a new version available, want to reload. You might know that from other applications. And we have that as well. Sometimes we just skip it, or just sometimes we do nothing. And next time you basically reload the page, you have the new version already. So it is a little bit like containers. We know that from containers. You basically install a new version next to it. And when you switch the service worker, it basically switches the production version. And this is, first of all, what you need for offline. And the challenges here is to actually manage it to that it's not, let's say, too large, and it does not have any problems doing so. Because if you have, for example, if you don't use frameworks, and even if you use frameworks, and you do too much in the service worker area, it might cause errors there and you don't see them, because it is quite hard to test that, because you can't do that really in TDD manner. You need to have some kind of test, because it's a proxy server which is running on the production version, because the service worker is normally not running while you develop. Or actually, it's not for us. So you need to test it in production mode. So even you start it as a production version, or you take a look at the staging version or whatever. And this is one of the challenges. I can say you should, let's say, have some caution there, and some attention, and pay attention to your service worker, because the service worker is actually an essential thing. When you use something like Cypress to test your website, it makes it a little bit more complicated to test end-to-end testing as well, because when you, for example, have a Cypress open thing and you open your browser, and the Cypress keeps the browser open, and you have some cache data, with the next iteration, the same cache data is still there, so you need to take care for that as well. This is something I just saw today.
There's also the added caveat that with any service worker, if your browser is overloaded and the service worker's owning tab is not active, the browser might optimize and force the service worker to go to sleep, right? So if you're doing any kind of headless stuff or testing or sort of automated testing on the same browser system that you're using for, I don't know, to keep your Gmail open, if it's the same underlying engine, but it's just a separate window or a separate user in that window, you might run into sort of this issue of you as the operator of your machine might actually be in the way of full isolation. But you can always solve that by full containerization, where you spin up a Docker image and then you have a headless browser running inside a Docker image, rather than, I hate when developers run Cypress on their native machine and it's their native browser. But sometimes you need that, because sometimes you might need access to plugins or Chrome extensions. Some businesses do have that level of complexity. So again, your mileage might vary.
Yeah, and probably some other caveats. We probably come to it. We still have some time today. Yeah, so this is actually
but you have to think about Mateusz and to some degree Grant as well. You have to think about what the alternative is. The alternative is that you're building a native web app, so not a PWA, just a web-based web app, and first render, first meaningful paint, first contentful paint will always take a long time, and it doesn't work when it's offline. Or you're building with React Native, a binary for the platform, but then you have the distribution problem of you now have to go through some form of governance, which creates artificial delay in how fast and whether you can have updates reach the user, right? So yes, it has its problems, but compared to what? Like, what is your alternative here? Plus, Apple has that licensing thing going on, and if you're a Linux user, you'll have to buy a Mac to do Mac development, unless you're using React Native with a cloud-based build. But it's an ecosystem problem primarily. If you're a small team, PWA, even though it comes with quite a few challenges, might make your ecosystem strategically simpler, so that you can sort of navigate a very good look and feel experience without having to invest a lot into just having a whole ecosystem for iPhone spin up for one developer, and then having a whole ecosystem spin up for Android for just one developer, then having a whole new ecosystem spin up for anything, landscape tablets, non-standard sizes, etc., etc. So that's like, you have to sort of be thinking about it on that level, strategic, business organization wise. If you're in a large org and you have 100 people in QA and engineering just for one platform, you might not see the same benefit, or you might be optimizing towards different constraints. But that's why the context matters so much.
Okay.
What else? So we come on for Linux implementation. I don't have any off the top of my head.
Great. There's no problems. Just do it. So since I'm working together with Camilla, I'm thinking about what she has in mind as our job. Yeah. So let's say we need to differentiate between what is specifically complicated doing with PWAs and just normal websites. This is two different things. And let's say just a subset of the PWA stuff. And as I said before, it's the service worker. The service worker is something you need to understand. So you need to be able to configure it. You need to understand how caching strategies are working, what you can actually cache. So, for example, a caveat can be that you use GraphQL a lot, GraphQL, for example, and you do everything in posts, for example. Sometimes you just do it because there are some reasons for doing that, and you can't cache that. So it is not only for, you can use a cache, let's say a service worker cache, not only for, let's say, caching the actual app, but you can cache, let's say, API calls as well, which is sometimes necessary. So sometimes caching for that works like you have an app and you want to get all products from a backend. Let's say 10,000 products you want to cache, and you basically load 1,000 by 1,000 by 1,000 until you have 10,000 on your in a background sync. And you want to have that cached. So you have two options to cache that. First of all is you do that manually. So you just download it and then you put it into the IndexedDB by yourself, and you load it always from the IndexedDB, not from the API. So this is the first strategy you do. The second one is you only use the API, let's say the cached version by the service worker, but then you need to make sure that's actually a GET thing, a GET request and not a post request. The alternative, for example, in the React universe would be something like 10-stack query with a persister. This is basically the version with the IndexedDB, just with a framework. And those are some caveats. So if you don't know what you do, you might run into problems later with caching and losing data and having problems when you have an unstable connection. So you should always have in mind when you do a PWA, the reason why you do that is most often that you might have let's say an unstable connection to the internet. This is way more common than actually having a bad performing device. It is more like the internet connection is more the problem, like bad Wi-Fi or something like that. And there is where PWA shines, and there is actually where you have the challenges. You need to create your application with bad internet connection in mind. So this is what I can contribute here. I just found an old project I could share. It does have service worker. It does have caches. That's quite interesting. Maybe I share it in the end, so stay tuned. It was a private project called Storify. It is not finished, and the UI is sometimes broken, but I can show it later. Then we have maybe more about problems. No, that was already. I had issues with deployment. I have issues with deployment once with a PWA clearing the cache on the browser. At least I think it was the issue. I had to clear it all manually. So when this is what I can show very quickly. It is like just now a practical thing. I'll just show this one again. No, actually I show something different. This lovely. No, I don't want to share this because then my login is gone. Something else. So let's go to Google. Google. Oh, I can type. My microphone is in the way.
Just careful. Don't dox yourself.
What?
Don't dox yourself. Like.
Excellent. So we have the storage here. So when we think of storage now,
we can't see anything. So.
Okay.
You're sharing.
La. That's true. Google. This one. So
this one.
You have there is basically what you have. This is the good thing to use actually Chromium browsers, because you have this view. It's like you see what's cached, you see what the service worker actually caches on that side. So there is actually on Google a service worker, which is interesting. We see it here as well. You can basically unregister, so you just deleted it. With the next reload of the page, it should be there again, but it isn't. I don't know why. That's interesting. It's still installing, right? No, it's not. Huh? Okay, never mind. It doesn't, I don't know what happens. Maybe I just got another version in an A/B test. I don't know. So Google is doing that quite often with YouTube. There are several versions of YouTube out there.
Yeah.
And so there's just caching in that one. And if I press this button, I basically delete the entire website except the file system. And the file system is not very widely used. So I think I don't even know one single website in awareness which is using the file system API. Actually, I think I'm the only one on this planet right now, so this is actually my feeling. If you press this button here, the file system is not deleted, but the
index. Can't see your file system button because
come on,
the web tools, the debug toolbar is a separate process. And StreamYard only picks up the process that has the rendered web page.
Okay, then the whole presentation does make no sense at the moment. Okay. Never mind. So, great. Next time we need to share the entire screen to do that. Okay, but yes, it's actually like that. So the only really persistent thing on your system is the file system API. As soon as you clear your entire cache of the website, your website, including your IndexedDB hard storage, is actually gone. And if you have it just cleared the browser history or something like that, it doesn't affect the actual databases on your website. So you need to take this into account. So which is the next one? I just lost it.
It's the one from Zoran. He asked,
okay,
yeah,
you do.
WebAssembly and PWA, how do they fit together?
Actually, they don't fit together really, because the WebAssembly is actually a concurrent concept of the PWA. I don't know exactly if this is
these are
official
orthogonal. These are orthogonal concepts, right?
Yeah. So you can download the WebAssembly or download the PWA. This is, they are not really integrated into each other. They're basically next to each other. So you could run both at the same time, but they're
solving slightly different problems.
Yeah. Yeah. So I would separate them in my head, and I would not come to the idea to try to fuse them on some point. Maybe I'm wrong. If there's someone who already did that and said, hey, you are totally wrong, please tell us. We always want to learn. But I don't see a purpose in that right now. This is simply my
technologies that can work together, that can be used separately, that can be employed for different problems.
Okay, we have Sabalier.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, you'll have to tell us at some point how we pronounce your nickname. Mateusz wrote, that's my
actually, she is already on the platform on OTJ Circle, right?
Yeah, maybe we can have this discussion there then. That's great.
We have already how many people? It's loading. We have 3 people already on our community page. So I just posted one more time.
We should probably make the event chat members only, so that there's an additional incentive to register.
I quickly post it one more time for everyone who's joined late. This is the Circle community. Have I posted it right now? So this is the Circle community.
Let's go.
Go there and make yourself an account. This is the simple way. Just we don't want to introduce it again. Just do it, and then we take a look what happens next. That's why it's sometimes better to use Electron Capacitor. That's a good topic, because you can also build Node.js backend app to support frontend. So Capacitor is actually an interesting point. Capacitor is basically the successor of Cordova, which was originally developed by Apache, as far as I remember. But Capacitor is done by the company behind Ionic Framework, which is actually called Ionic. And they created Capacitor as a bridge. So the bridge between the browser and the native capabilities. So you basically have a JavaScript API to call native APIs, actually. So devices, features, capabilities. And this is, Capacitor does work for the browser as well. So for example, if you say, give me the camera, Capacitor is actually an abstraction which gives you the camera depending on where you are. So if you are only, in quotes, on the web, you get basically, let's say, I don't know exactly how they do, probably some form of API or using the input tag with camera capture. I don't know exactly how they're doing that, but they provide you the capabilities of the browser. And when you go on in the native device, for example, you have built it in an app shell for Android or iOS, you will get what the native camera implementation of Capacitor is right now.
I see.
So, which means this is one of those advantages some years ago, because the camera implementations 3 or 4 years ago were horrible. So there was this Huawei P30, and I hated this phone. So, it was like people were always having problems. They always they basically have the user-facing camera only. So no matter what you've done, you only got this camera in the browser. That was a bug to that time. And basically, if you would have native apps, you probably wouldn't have those problems. And this is actually where native apps still have advantages, or had. So today, we never saw this, had some similar problem like this again. And since we have WRTC, it is actually something which you can take photos with as well. They are not as great as, let's say, your native camera implementation in your browser, if you have it available. So in the browser, for example, it is a little different than on the smartphone when you are mobile. But it got better. Let's say it got better, but still Capacitor is a viable option if you want to, for example, create something with the entirety of your GPS device, with all the features your phone is actually providing. Because, for example, when you want to use it in the web, you need to do something in order to localize if you are in on real GPS data right now, so satellite collection, or do you have IP location at the moment, or are you in Wi-Fi at the moment?
Combination of these things.
Of combination, right? And it is a little bit more complicated. So actually, I've written a tool to determine this with just browser. So it is working, but it is like with capacitor, you just get it. It's basically simply a wrapper for you,
on top
right?
of the native SDKs.
So was that actually the question? But yeah, I just saw capacitor and I was hooked. Capacitor is a great tool, but we ditched it because it is not necessary anymore for, let's say, majority of the requirements out there. So today we have a very good support regarding modern browser technologies. But Electron and capacitors, for example, good. Everyone who's using something like Slack or Teams, I don't know Slack, but Teams it definitely was using for quite a while Electron. I think they've changed it now, but it was basically a PWA in Electron, and you could basically install it everywhere, which was quite neat. So you don't need to have a browser to install your PWA, but you can install your PWA with just an installing wrapper, which is cool as well. Okay, then we have community integration with iOS devices is a bit troublesome most of the time. Our life is easier on Android devices as usual. So I think Raul is a native developer, right? Correct me if I'm wrong, Raul. I think you are a native developer. And so you have basically the same problems as we PWA persons have. It's like, we don't like, even this was the reason why I actually bought myself a M1 laptop, and I got this device now as well, just to be able to have those simulators, because I don't have an iPhone which I can develop on. So I have Android. I'm actually an Android person. I like Samsungs. And so I need to have a way to actually test it on devices. And this is a little bit like spending that amount of money just to have simulators. Well, I like the Macs actually, so I don't like the handheld devices, but it is a little bit awkward, to be honest. Still, this vendor login you have, and I hope follow Mark van Nerven on LinkedIn. He just posts a lot about that exact topic, what Apple is doing at the moment, but it's all open up to PWA. It is getting better, definitely month by month. So take a look at the WebKit blog. If you're interested in that topic, take a look at the WebKit blog. This is the underlying engine in Safari, and they are leaning towards PWA even more than the Apple corporation itself. So the WebKit team is eager to finally fulfill web standards, which is the PWA standard actually defined by others, and they want to keep up. So this is something we really should follow now. Next one then. Last one, actually. There are already solutions for Wasm apps, ASP.NET browser. Good. We need to take a look at it.
It's Blazor, right?
Blazor.
Is it a typo? I think it's a typo. I think it's Blazor.
Is it? I never heard of that. So good to know about that. Actually,
I'll take a look. I had a C# client a while back, and
when I think of quickly, WebAssembly. So Wasm, our WebAssemblies, is there's a big problem. So most of the teams I know today know nothing about the languages. Yeah, exactly. And it's not like when you have JavaScript or a team which is based on JavaScript, just stay with JavaScript. So I mentioned the example in the beginning with team caveats, limitation and resources, real requirements, real timelines, and all this kind of stuff. Stay with what is available as native as possible. And when I say native in this case, I mean the browser. So the browser is something native as well. And
the browser is already written in C++. The DOM, the rendering, the web APIs, they're already written in C++. It's just that you interface with the C++ API through JavaScript. So unless you're not doing anything really extreme, like re-implementing a browser or doing some, video encoding on the user's machine, you have no problems. Like the hard problems were already solved. It's using because you have to zoom out a bit, and you really need to think about it, like philosophically. I invite you to think about it just for a moment. Consider, why did JavaScript become so popular? Because what's the alternative? Every operating system's SDKs and APIs to access rendering APIs, hardware acceleration APIs, and window management APIs sucked. Microsoft had, I think, 17 different APIs. Linux had 3, but they were all shit. And then on iOS, we had every few years where they updated the hardware, they would also ditch the API and go, and whenever they went from ATI to Intel, from integrated to onboard to now having M2s, every time Apple isn't afraid of ditching their native SDKs. The iOS being the large exception because it was so popular. But we got lucky there. But again, if I spoke to an iOS developer, they would probably know this problem to such a detail that at their level of detail, what I just said isn't factual. So the reason we have adopted web technologies is because by being forced to standardize to such a degree, we got away from all of those annoying operating system dominated APIs and SDKs without getting too far away from the metal, from the hardware itself. That's the whole idea here. Because if you remember, if you wanted graphical acceleration in 2005, 2010 on the browser, you had to build a Silverlight app or a Java applet, or enable exotic plugins in your browser to have early access to WebGL. It was not a pretty place. It was very difficult to code against the native APIs, and it was also difficult to code against the native APIs with the operating systems SDKs that you were already given, because they were always vendor locked behind their distribution centers, right? So if you wanted to use DirectX, your game needed to be signed against the correct version of DirectX, right? So when you were shipping the game, you had to have a license with Microsoft, and you had to declare which DirectX version you're using. Which means that if you then didn't run the latest DirectX version, you needed to declare that, and then they would sort of shadow ban you on the App Store for using old driver technologies. It was a constant struggle to get anything done. Imagine now you build a website, you don't update it for 30 years, it might still render correctly. That is the reason why web technologies got so popular. That we didn't have to rewrite our applications every time every time the market dominance and the operating systems changed, every time the operating systems themselves changed which the preferred API is. And if you went from Windows XP to Vista to then 7, it's a roller coaster. Same thing with Linux, with Qt and similar old, very, very traditional APIs. So the philosophical reason why these technologies exist in the first place is so that we have a shared ecosystem where we get closer to the metal, but away from the operating system. Because then the browser basically handles a middleware layer, a containerization layer almost, between what we render on screen and the operating system, while also being secure, while also being performant, while also being isolated and somewhat sort of judicious about resource spending and file system access and security, etc., etc., etc. So if you want to do WebAssembly, the reason to do WebAssembly is that you are in a problem space that has a super optimal solution in another language that doesn't compile well to JavaScript. It doesn't have to be JavaScript, but it doesn't perform well when compiled to JavaScript. Right? So you need to have a problem where native compilation to WebAssembly gives better performance than compilation to JavaScript, than transliteration to JavaScript. That's when you would naturally use WebAssembly.
I was always thinking that WebAssemblies is actually to include the 30 years of experience developers into the web, to give them a chance to keep up as well, right? or was it
I mean-
it a different thing?
I mean, props to the C# ecosystem. I don't like the .NET ecosystem too much because it's heavily vendor locked in. The tooling, the servers, the licensing, the focus on Azure. It never appealed to me.
I needed to configure Windows Server, so I never like Windows again. Anything with Microsoft, I don't like again. So if you
just
ever have to work more than 10 years with IIS web service in production, then you don't like Microsoft anymore.
So I
You
just want to
simply
highlight
like that.
what Mark mentions. Good show, gotta go. It's good to go on JavaScript. Okay, we should get Mark on stage.
Yeah, we should. He's
a good
critical
market.
on some point, but I really like that.
Yeah, Mark, register on the new Circle community website. And
Yes.
let's open a private chat to get you on stage. It would be great to have you. Thanks for watching to the end. But I want to highlight Mateusz's example. There are also teams with Node.js devs, and they need to create everything. Full-stack devs with C#, Python, or others. With WASM, they can create front-end using the language more. Yes, JS is still needed, but not so much. We need to remember that not every company project can afford only JS devs or back-end and front-end teams. So this
why
is,
do you mean? Why do you mean, Mateusz? Why do you mean afford? So that means. So in which context do you mean afford? Do you mean it like you have specific requirements that JavaScript is not working for that team, or do you actually think of a costly aspect? That would be interesting for me.
So from my experience, this kind of take is a specific problem that only exists in the .NET ecosystem or data science, where it's very much Python dominated. Python, R, and MATLAB, and all those, and vector databases, right? So this is not really a web-specific problem. This is a problem where, let's say, you're coming from a traditional desktop application company, organization that focuses on Microsoft technologies. And Microsoft made it extremely easy for you to transfer all of your knowledge and go to the web without having to adopt a new language like JavaScript, or even worse, a new ecosystem that was JavaScript. So if you're a .NET developer, regardless of which framework, right? Whether you're in ASP.NET or you're in sort of more desktop heavy C#, F#, or if you're more into the sort of in between place that Mateusz mentions, or Blazor, or anything more web oriented, you need to take into consideration that the problem originates from Microsoft's tooling for Microsoft's dedicated services is so strong that you are personally so attached to these tools that any kind of other ecosystem is very unattractive to you if you buy into that lock-in, right? So usually Node.js developers, JavaScript developers, React developers, they do AWS, Node.js, and React Native. That's their sort of stack, which is completely anathema to any kind of C# development shop. And Raul mentions, you guys are not ready for the dark side of the force, Microsoft.
I just got out of that.
Microsoft. I'm not hating Microsoft. Their tools are great. The ecosystem is great. It's a very sort of forward-thinking company that I think in the last 10, 15 years has done a lot to really compete with the big five, with big tech, because they were seen as this sort of slow, sluggish corporate style software development force in the market. But it's really come down to the point of which ecosystem do you prefer. If you don't like Node.js and if you don't like writing React, that's okay. But you need to be honest with yourself. The browsers don't natively run without JavaScript. Anything modern browser related, right? So anybody who says we don't have money to hire JavaScript devs, well, you don't need money to hire JavaScript devs and fire your C# developers. Those C# developers can just learn a little bit of JavaScript. It's not that hard, especially if you're learning Blazor or if you're learning anything sort of front-end middleware-ish. If you already have frameworks, you can gradually over time adopt a new framework. I'm not saying you should, but it's better than saying, hey, we will never do JavaScript. We will only do C# converted to JavaScript when Microsoft supports it, only for the use cases that Microsoft supports it. Because if you're that heavily leaning to your framework, your product will always be shit. Because you will encounter problems that your framework is not a good solution for, then you'll have no alternative to explore. And that's, strategically speaking, for the business, that is always a bad deal. That is a bad set of cards that you just have two bad options there. We keep the user experience meh, or we remove the feature. Right? I mean, and you can see if you're using Microsoft Teams on a Mac, you'll immediately get what I'm talking about. Because it's a shitty experience. But they have no choice. Right? But I would say if you're in that kind of ecosystem and you're targeting the non-native sort of desktop or mobile targets, really rethink your stance on, like, is the identity of the C# ecosystem so important to you? Because it is not up to you personally, right? It's about the organization. If the organization prides itself by being a licensed Microsoft partner, this is going to be an uphill battle. The best solution would be to just progressively go into, from C# to TypeScript, because, Microsoft is the majority leading force behind the TypeScript Foundation. So that you're already in that camp. It's very natural to sort of step into TypeScript. That's why they adopted TypeScript into their family of languages, and they're making it very similar to C#, right? So nowadays the most similar language to C# is TypeScript. And the ecosystem is also adopting by Visual Studio and VS Code, sort of getting native support for both, without you having to sort of bend over backwards and install like a fake Linux in your Windows system, if that's your ecosystem of choice. And now you have Bun, which fixes Bun and Vitess, right? So you have the option of having native tools or Rust written tools to get past that hurdle. Because I get it. If you were a die-hard Windows fan, 10 years ago you were using things like Borland compiler to get Cygwin running on your Windows machine to get the Linux environment. This was before PowerShell and similar tools. Right? So you gotta be thinking about sort of your overall philosophy about, hey, am I vendor locked in? Yeah. If yes, if I want to go across the vendor lock-in border, what motivates me to do that? Because if I'm just complaining about it from my side, then that's never gonna go away. You gotta go over the fence and adopt new technologies, and then figure out, okay, this is not gonna constantly be a problem, to actually pull them back. My strategic advice would be try to think more about micro front ends or federated front ends or middleware applications. Adrian talks a lot about routers, federated APIs, and if this continues to be a recurring problem, rather than cramming C# into your WebAssembly and then using it as a deployment target, try to figure out if you can split up your front end and maybe actually have somebody else write a part of your front end for you that talks to a router through some other microservice written in some other language to optimize for one solution. That would be the most mature way of solving that problem, without obsessing about, okay, who we need to hire, etc. Just architecturally rethink so you can actually, okay, this is a problem. If we do it, user experience will always be shit. It's very hard to force it in. So architecturally, we need to sort of do some kind of micro front and microservice in good spirit on top of our monolith. I think that would be the sort of most mature way to tackle this. Again, context is everything. I don't know about your context very well, so if you have more questions, sign up for the community and the link down below, and let's have a
I joined the community. I just forgot to mention. We just forgot to mention that we will have meetings as well. So mini conferences
off stream for the regulars.
Exactly. So everyone who's on this community will have a chance to talk with us directly. Ask us anything. We won't do that actually in that term on stream, just that you have the possibility known as well. Okay.
So I just want to highlight this comment here about WebAssembly. So GWT flopped very heavily, because it got GWT got the problem backwards, right? GWT said, "Oh, we're Java developers. All the Java developers hate JavaScript, so we will write Java, and then that Java will be compiled to JavaScript." And that was a terrible idea.
What is GWT?
It's Google Web Toolkit. It's a technology from 2008 that sort of wanted to spearhead Silverlight off of the market by, it was basically Java serverless that got compiled down to JavaScript for the browser. It was a terrible experience. Terrible experience. Because in the browser, you still need to solve the problem of, tree shaking. You need to have your.
So it's actually good that I don't know it when it's a terrible experience. There are so many
really
terrible experiences. You don't need to go through every of those in your life,
I was on Google I/O in San Francisco when they announced it, and I just saw it and I was like, no.
I saw Internet Explorer 5, so I know everything. So it was the Microsoft hell back then, right?
But the point isn't that you can build the web without knowing web. You're still using the DOM. You're still using web APIs, right? But the DOM, the web API, the native tools that the browser gives you, those are already written in C++ or the native language of the browser.
Well, Flutter, we mentioned Flutter, so you can actually use Flutter in order to transpile Dart, I think it's Dart, into JavaScript.
Dart, yeah.
You can do that.
GWT was in a similar vein.
Is that if this is a good thing or not is another topic. So actually, I have prepared a new article exactly about the comparison of all three with large matrices and stuff like this. So maybe we're talking about that one in another show. So this is actually quite interesting topic to compare the great competitors of PWA, which is React Native and Flutter. It may be something different I haven't seen yet, but the big ones are actually those three. And for me, still, this year is my PWA year, since we have push notifications now, finally, on iOS. This is somehow the most required feature. And we actually don't implement this, but everyone is talking about push notifications as it, most people still want to have emails, but somehow they always think, hey, push notifications are something we can't build a PWA.
The problem with push notifications is that it is a paid service at volume between the operating service owner, the operating system owner, and the telecoms. Because we still haven't bridged this gap. So
No.
The ability to send a push notification has to be sanctioned. It has to be sanctioned by the telecom and the operating system provider.
Okay.
But luckily we only have two because we have a monopoly. So it's only Android and it's only Google and it's only Apple that sort of have to do this. And usually, even the telecoms are highly dominated. So we just have to go to Vodafone and Verizon and AT&T, and you sort of cover 90% of the market.
I was not aware of that. I need to pay anything for that.
No, you don't need to. They need to pay for technology, but they pay at a X amount for trillions of notifications, right? So it is an infrastructure level concern. The same, this is why, for example, in some countries, you don't get live service or direct API access for certain push notifications or for background updates or etc. or GPS access.
Yeah. Mateusz is actually right. The first time I heard from WebAssemblies, I was thinking about Flash, because Flash was actually the exact thing. It was solving nearly exact the same problem back then.
Yeah.
It was a high-performant thing. You need to download first. Of course, it was clumsy.
It was the only way to get to the graphics API adapter without going through a native Java or applet native interface. Because the browser didn't have access to your hardware acceleration on the graphics card.
Now let's talk a little bit about what modern browsers can do. Browsers
we're
can.
5 minutes over the show's end, so let's have a full topic on this and let's think about it a little bit more deeply. As always, you can find me on Substack, and you can find Adrian on Substack.
I just go through all the things which we haven't shown yet because we have a promise. So Sabrina says, I can't hate Microsoft. I just hate Windows, Linux lover. Good reason. Well, you have WSL on Windows now. And was it here where we had the discussion if it's possible to have an Apple Mac have Parallels on it and WSL on Windows?
I don't.
That you
recall
basically have all major OSs on one computer?
I don't recall that conversation, but I'm a Mac owner. I always have Windows installed.
We had that quite often. I just wanted to show that. No.
I actually have to share an anecdote. I actually met one of our viewers yesterday. They came to Slovenia. They were sort of traveling, and so I met Stefan. Perhaps you remember Stefan from our Christmas episode with Nicholas, and I think one of the Taldon Askata or one of the coding ones. So Stefan came to Slovenia. He was here yesterday, and we met in person. Had a great discussion. And he had the same comment about like when we go into a complex topic, you realize that it's not just the mechanics. You actually end up you and I actually end up using quite complex terminology. So maybe we can sort of
so I just want to explain that this is important for everyone here. So Camilla will join us definitely in the next weeks as well again, and
awesome.
she is junior developer. So we are obviously senior developers. I think we are. After 24 years, it would be bad if we are not that. So actually, it is about engineering. And this is a topic for me I just want to mention. Just some minutes, Dennis, please. It is like we have this distinction between developers and engineers. So actually, I have this. And especially in the last years, and I am an employer. So basically, I employ other engineers as well. And the point is that especially when you have people who are in the mindset of a developer, they often don't think very far. Don't get me wrong now. No, it's not, let's say, it's not meant in a bad way. So it's often like, especially I have that in my home country where developers by name feel a little bit like, let's do one thing after another. And we had that in the past, especially 20 years ago, that we had more the idea of being an engineer, thinking ahead of time and getting feedback about what you just thought ahead. And this is very important to understand. And this show is about software engineering and not so much about software development when it comes to mindsets, which means that we try to have complex topics and use complex engineering terminology to have a common baseline. So we don't want to find easy words to attract non-developers. This is not what we want to do. We want to talk to other engineers, but in a way which is understandable for junior engineers. So if you have problems understanding those terminologies, it is a reason for you to Google them, to ask AI about them, and learn about them after the show. This is what I do. So I noted already all the things, which was just GWT to be honest, what I'm not knowing about. So I start to learn about that, even if it's outdated technology. The point is, this show is about learning, because Dennis and me, we are both coaches, we are both mentors. We help others to learn. And what we don't do is using wrong terminologies, wrong language.
We try to be precise in our articulation.
And this is, in Germany, we call that Fachsprache, which is, I don't know if there is actually...
It's jargon, it's technical jargon.
Jargon, right. And this is especially important to understand why we use that, because this is the language you need to learn anyway. So we don't, invent any words. Most of the stuff we use is, in some form or another, common. And you should use that as well on some point. So, for example, one of the most complicated things Dennis ever said to me was connaissance. Actually, Nicholas was doing that as well. So about 1.5 years ago, I really got into connaissance when I first met Nicolas Oquette. We had him on the show as well. And connaissance
is the philosophy behind coupling. That's the
exactly.
Sort of
and this is, for example, one of those. Oh, this is. You need to even be able to write it correctly down, right?
Hard to spell. That's
and then you have connaissance of time, connaissance of position, connaissance of meaning, and all this kind of stuff. There it gets complicated. Those are senior topics. But there are junior topics. PWA is a junior topic. JavaScript, TypeScript is a junior topic. WASM, let's say middle ground somewhere. But if you don't understand something, first of all, you can ask us to any time. Just send us a message, join the community first, then send us a message, and feel free to ask us questions. We will help you. We will give you the right links. And it is about learning. You need to have some motivation. But what we won't do is lower down the quality of everything, because in the end we want to serve seniors as well as junior developers, or even pre-junior bootcamp grads. That's
Or
actually the
business
same.
owners for non-technical.
Exactly.
And sort of they hear the words often used at their work, but they know that it's just a step too far for them. But at least they would like us to use the same terminology. They are.
But please think
we
as
talk about
engineers. You are, most of you are software engineers. The development, this is software development, is actually what our team is doing. And what the overall idea of what you are doing in the profession. But you yourself, you are an engineer, someone who's planning ahead and getting feedback in iterations. Of course, not in a waterfall principle. This is not what I mean now. But you think about something you want to iterate because you have requirements, you have qualities or non-functional requirements, you have your context, and you want to test something. And you need to put it to a test. So you build it properly, engineer it properly, and then get feedback. And then you iterate on that. This is what you do as a software engineer. And this is where I think Dave Farley is doing the same, and Brian Finster as well. They are very distinctive.
It's a common theme. Yes. So
And
the issue is that in Europe, especially, engineering, the term engineer in Slovenian, ingenieur, was by law reserved for a very specific school of professions. The same way that a doctor might mean something very specific, and an MD, a medical doctor, is something different from a PhD, right? So it is those terms, when there's a certified board behind it, that sort of says, if you communicate this way, we need to exemplify that you are certified and that it's a job that can only be conducted by a certified person. The problem is software engineers never really got this rigor. We never really got certified boards for engineering. Like you need to be a PhD in this to be allowed to write fintech software. We don't have that. You have SOX in the US, where business directors are responsible with jail time if anything goes wrong in their sort of fintech business, or if there's any kind of financial documentation being sort of tampered with. But in Europe, we don't have that so far. So people tend to avoid this. I won't use the word engineer because engineer is something specific. I'm not allowed to use. That's just imposter syndrome. You're allowed and you're encouraged to call yourself a software engineer. Like you're not a traditional engineer. Let's not mix up the terminology. But you are a software engineer to the degree that you are involved with product engineering. You're not coding. You're not solving lead code problems for food. You're solving problems that users, customers, and the business cares about. It's touching real-world problems, real-world data, real-world money, or crypto money, or made-up money, or NFTs, whatever. But the point is that you, as a professional, have to sort of understand the business context of what you're doing. You're not just implementing another feature using React. That is a very naive and belittling stance towards yourself that will stump your growth, right? So that's why we use these specific terminologies. And Stefan and I had this similar conversation yesterday, because he's now making a shift from construction to engineering in the last few years. And he had a similar idea of like, okay, but the terminology and it's complex, and it's not just the mechanics. You actually have to understand the business context. And then there's the additional level of domain-driven design, where you as a business also have to write down your own language. Hey, in our business, this term means this. In Uber, a driver means something very specific. With Uber Eats, a delivery means something very specific. An order means something very specific. On Slack, I like to use on Slack and Microsoft Teams, the term seat or a licensed seat or a team member means something very specific because it impacts how much they're charging you, right? But it has nothing to do with a chair, right? So it's these languages that are then ubiquitous within the business that then really build on top of your technical jargon. But this is not technical jargon per se. It is, this technology solves this problem really well. This technology is being shaped by this community. This community speaks in a certain way to separate itself from similar languages that are confusing if they are not highly specific, right? So, for example, Redux had this huge problem, and I think somebody mentions it. Mateusz, I mentioned it earlier. Maybe wrong word. Afford, maybe wrong word. I mean that for some reason they can spend time for learning new tools. For example, React for C# devs is hard because it's driven by different paradigms. Exactly. The paradigm is different, right? C# for the longest time has been a very C, Java, Hibernate, and sort of MVC style inspired framework ecosystem that has a very specific paradigm of working. There are terminologies there, repositories, enumerators, I this, I that. There are certain styles of writing where there's a certain implicit understanding of if I use the capital I in front of something, that means something very specific. But it only makes sense to a C# dev. But that's why it's so important to sort of be very specific when you know that you're talking to another C# dev. If you're not talking to another C# dev, you actually have to use the generic term for that concept, which might be a label, right, for a type, not so much an interface. Because interface might mean something else to a Go developer than it does to a C# developer. So it might be a type declaration or a type interface or a composite of types, right? So it's I'm waffling now. So that's the point. Good point. Tomorrow is about extreme programming. We got Daniel Moka joining us as a guest. It will be basically a deep dive into extreme programming. He's also coaching extreme programming. So we sort of get behind the scenes of coaching. We have behind the scenes of mentoring from within the team while being employed. And Daniel is like super high energy.
It will be extremely extreme tomorrow. So if you join, be prepared to be, extremely challenged by us.
Yeah. If you have any other questions, or if you're feeling bad that we sort of stopped the conversation just now, go to the circle and continue the conversation there, and we'll sort of
go to circle.
Go to
our tech journey.circle.so, I think.
Here's the link. Here's the link in the banner. It's in the chat.
That's good. So yeah. We have already Raul joined, Grant joined, Kamina joined, Thomas joined.
And if there's something
Sabrina
you'd like to
joined,
see,
Akira,
let us know, and we'll add it. Thank you so much for being with us live today. I do have to go because it's bedtime with the kiddos.
Okay, so let's wrap up then. So
yes.
Thank you very much, everyone. So appreciate really the feedback of you. So again, it was a session totally driven by the audience, so nearly totally driven, but it was very, very good. It is always interesting to understand what your ideas are, and just tell us if you want to have a follow-up, if you what I already asked. So we got some responses here as well. If you are interested in a practical session about what we've just done theoretical today, so maybe we can do next week. So it was supposed to be 2 weeks anyway.
Recording again. Yeah, we're definitely doing more.
We work on a PWA. We work on with Service Worker. We do some updates, and that's actually something we do then. Okay, thank you very much for this. Really appreciating that. Thanks, Dennis, for being part of our show again. I don't know.
You too.
Thank you.
And the audience. So, as always, you can find us on LinkedIn and Substack.
And Circle. I think we haven't mentioned it today. We have a new.
Okay. Bye.
Goodbye.
Wait, that's the wrong song. There we go.
Kinds of one thing. Number one, there's the engineering feedback, right?
Okay.
I'm going to deliver this change today to find out if it breaks it. And then there's the business feedback. I'm going to deliver the smallest slice of this next feature to find out if it's valuable and deliver that and get feedback. But
figure out if it's safe to merge and whether it's safe to continue with these requirements.
Yeah.
That's all.
Just because it passes all the tests doesn't mean that it doesn't break something in production once it finally gets to a production environment. I try to have a high level of confidence, but we're never 100% sure.
Yeah.
And so we want to get feedback as rapidly as possible on the engineering thing. And people tell me there's no value in delivering anything until it's feature complete. No. I know it's stable. I want to make sure we're on the right track. I don't want to invest too much money in this idea. I don't want to assume my idea is correct. I want to assume my idea is incorrect. It's a scientific experiment. I'm trying to invalidate the hypothesis. And we should be ecstatic when it's successful. and just accept when it's not. And then how do we change course to make it to chase the value instead of just assuming value?
I would like to add something to the term of confidence. I think confidence doesn't mean that you are 100%, as you said, 100% safe to deploy. It's about to be confident that you can handle a situation even if something happened, but you expect feedback. So what you definitely get is feedback. And if the feedback is a negative, you can react quickly on that. So this is confidence. It's not about, oh, I'm 100% sure that nothing will happen. I think this is a big misconception.
No, I agree. And people focus on the wrong thing. I want to make sure that everything is perfect before we deliver. That's the wrong thing.